The last text my husband ever sent me as a husband arrived at 10:47 p.m. while I was standing in front of the kitchen sink, with my hands in dishwater, and a baby kicking under my ribs. It was just 4 lines. I can't do this. I'm not coming back. I'll send money when I can. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. For a second, my brain tried to file it with the usual noise promo emails. Group chats, banking alerts. Then his name at the top of the screen cut through. ETHAN. My thumb left a wet print on the glass as I tapped the notification open. The screen blurred. Cleared. Blurred again. I told myself he was drunk. Overwhelmed. That there'd be another message, some stupid joke. A sorry, a call. Nothing else came. The tap was still running. The cheap rental kitchen filled with the hiss of water hitting porcelain. Somewhere in the building, someone's television laughed too loudly. The baby shifted, protesting the way my chest had suddenly caved in. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe at first. I just stared at the words like they were numbers in a spreadsheet, waiting for the pattern to emerge. I can't do this. I'm not coming back. He was supposed to be on a 2-day work trip to Portland. Sales conference, he'd said, kissing my forehead like I was the one who needed reassuring. I'd packed his suitcase myself, folding his shirts over the quiet resentments I never said out loud. I locked the phone and walked down the hall to our bedroom. Half his closet was empty. It wasn't the gaping space where his suits had been that got me, or the stripped hangers swinging like broken ribs. It was the small things. The watch box missing from the dresser. The leather dop kit gone from the bathroom sink. The drawer where he kept his passport and social security card, scraped clean. This hadn't been a panic. It had been a project. The baby rolled hard against my spine, like she knew something in our world had shifted. I pressed both palms to the side of my belly and sat down on the edge of the bed he'd left unmade. 9 years earlier, when we were 24 and dazzled by the idea of building a life together, Ethan had told everyone I was the practical one, the steady one. He said it like a compliment, but I learned fast that it was also permission for him to dream recklessly, because I would quietly make the math work. I took the safer job in corporate accounting while he bounced between startups. I put off grad school so his freelance sales career could take off. I refinanced my tiny condo to pay off his credit cards, just this once. Every time, he promised he'd make it up to me when his big break came. Now, 8 months pregnant with our daughter, my feet swollen and my back screaming. His big break was apparently walking out of our life by text. I set the phone on the nightstand like it was something that might explode, and went back to the kitchen to turn off the tap. The water had risen to the lip of the sink, cloudy with dish soap and soggy bits of dinner. I pulled the plug and watched it drain away. A whirlpool swallowing everything we'd planned. Still no second message. No call. I dried my hands, opened the Notes app and started a list. Rent due on the 1st. Prenatal appointment Thursday. 3 p.m. maternity leave starts in 3 weeks. Underneath, I added a new header without fully deciding to. Things Ethan left. Half the couch. The lease in both our names. My car in my name only. My salary. And beneath that, in smaller letters, the baby. It was ridiculous, maybe, to make a list while my marriage dissolved by text. But lists were how my brain understood chaos. Numbers, categories, receipts. This wasn't the first time Ethan had turned our life into an emergency. It was just the first time he hadn't bothered to pretend I was his partner while he did it. I opened his text again. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. There it was, the quiet little twist of the knife. In his mind, he was the one doing something difficult, something noble even, and my job was, as always, to absorb the impact. My chest burned. My eyes stayed dry. I typed, "Are you serious?" The 3 dots appeared. blinked, disappeared, appeared again. I braced for an explanation, an apology. Something. Nothing. I didn't send another message. Instead, I scrolled up through our conversation, through months of logistics and gentle reminders, screenshots of budgets, pictures I'd sent from ultrasound appointments he'd missed because of meetings. At the top of the thread, I took a screenshot. Then another. Then I emailed them to myself and dragged the file into a new folder on my laptop. I named it Ethan Pregnancy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The next morning, my boss called me into a glass-walled conference room to talk about my maternity leave plan. I sat there in my only blazer that's still buttoned, staring at the color-coded calendar I'd made for the transition, hearing Ethan's text under every polite word. "We can be flexible if you need to extend," my boss, Carla, said, tapping her pen against the printed schedule. "Do you have family nearby?" My family lived 3 states away. Ethan's mother, who Dee once announced over Thanksgiving turkey that I was so lucky to have landed her son, was in the same city but had never asked how my pregnancy was going unless he was in the room. "I'll manage," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "I've got some savings." I didn't mention that those savings were the remnants of the down payment fund ID built before marriage. The one ID mentally labeled our future house, and he mentally labeled safety net I can play with. Carla studied me for a moment. She was 10 years older, divorced, and had clawed her way up the corporate ladder in heels. She didn't ask about Ethan. I was grateful. When I left work that day, I stopped by the bank. "I need to separate my direct deposit into a new account," I told the teller. "Just under my name." The woman behind the counter nodded like she heard versions of this request more often than anyone liked to admit. "We can do that," she said. "Do you want a joint account linked or completely separate?" "Completely separate," I said. By the time I walked out, I had a new debit card on the way, and online banking credentials that didn't include his name anywhere. That night, when the baby twisted hard enough to make me gasp, I lay on my side and whispered to her. "It's you and me, kid," I said into the dark. "I'm not going anywhere." Ethan didn't come back the next day. Or the next. He didn't show up to the ultrasound where they checked her heart. The nurse asked if Dad would be joining us, and I lied and said he was traveling for work. My voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't press. When I went into labor 3 weeks early, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Garza, who pounded on my door because she heard me groaning through the thin apartment walls. "Don't you dare try to drive yourself," she scolded, hauling my hospital bag over her shoulder. I've raised 5. I know that sound. On the hospital intake form, there was a line for father's name. I left it blank. "Is he?" the nurse asked gently. "He's alive," I said. "Just not here." I birthed my daughter with a stranger holding my thigh and my landlord's wife fanning my face with a file folder. When they placed the baby on my chest, slick and furious, her cry cut through the sterile air and the leftover space where Ethan should have been. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. I'd been waiting to decide until Ethan was in the room. It had felt like a thing we should do together, like picking the shade of paint for a nursery we couldn't afford. Now the answer came as easily as exhaling. "Lena," I said. "Her name is Lena." It was a name I'd loved since I was a teenager. I'd given it up once because Ethan thought it sounded too serious and wanted something trendier. He wasn't here. The person who had stayed was the girl who'd once written Lena in the margins of her notebooks and drawn tiny crayons over the E. They cleaned her, weighed her, wrapped her, and wheeled us to a dim recovery room. At some point, between the nurse checking my blood pressure and someone bringing me a sad turkey sandwich, my phone buzzed. "Congratulations," came the text. "I heard from my mom you had the baby. Glad everything went okay. No question mark. No exclamation point. No offer to come. I stared at the screen, at the tiny read receipt under the message ID sent him 2 days earlier, going to the hospital, contractions 5 minutes apart, and felt something in me settle. He wasn't going to be the father who rushed down the hall in scrubs, breathless with love. He was going to be the man who heard about his daughter from his mother and sent a text like signing for a package. I took another screenshot. Over the next weeks, while Lena learned to breathe and latch and scream at 3 a.m., I learned how to hold her with one arm and document with the other. Every missed call from Ethan, every vague promise to figure out child support. Every time his name showed up in my notifications, I saved it. I opened a new folder on my laptop, ETHAN Child Support. Inside it, subfolders, texts, emails, deposits, no-shows. I wasn't planning revenge. Not then. I was planning survival. But survival, I would learn, has a way of becoming a strategy all its own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. By the time Lena turned 2, I had returned to work, been passed over for a promotion, and started a side business at my kitchen table between nap times. It began with one small business owner who couldn't make sense of his books. He was a friend of a friend, a mechanic who slid a shoebox of crumpled receipts across my table and said, "I heard you're good with numbers. I can't pay much, but..." I charged him less than I should have, and more than he expected. When I handed him back a clean set of statements and a tax plan, he hugged me so hard I almost spilled my coffee. "You should do this for a living," he said. I already did it for a living for a corporation that sent me polite emails about budget constraints, when my raise didn't match my workload. But there was a different kind of electricity in sitting across from someone whose life I could actually see. So I built a simple website during the hours when Lena finally slept, and the apartment went quiet. I named the business Juniper Ledger, after the tree I'd once wanted in our non-existent backyard. I didn't tell Ethan. We had by then an informal schedule of disappointment. He'd swing in every few months with a video call, promising to visit, cooing at Lena through the screen like an uncle instead of a father. He'd send $200 one month and nothing the next. When I asked for something consistent, he accused me of trying to bleed him dry. "I'm doing my best," he texted once, after missing Lena's birthday for the 2nd year in a row. "You don't know how much pressure I'm under." I stared at the message while sitting on the floor, Lena asleep across my lap, cake crumbs ground into the carpet by the feet of the 3 toddlers who had actually shown up. I did no pressure. I knew the precise weight of rent plus groceries plus daycare plus car repairs. I knew the way my chest tightened every time the daycare called from an unknown number, in case it was bad news and I'd have to leave work early. But there is no line item for that in a conversation with a man like Ethan. In his story, he was always the main character, always the one on the brink of something grand he couldn't quite name. So instead of arguing, I replied, "Please put any offers or changes in writing." And I dragged the text into the child support, greater than text folder. Juniper Ledger grew quietly. A florist referred a baker, who referred a tattoo artist, who referred a yoga studio. I took 2 client calls at my lunch break and 3 after I put Lena to bed. I built spreadsheets until my eyes crossed and my fingers twitched in my sleep. At 33, I signed papers to register my business as an LLC. At 34, I handed in my notice at the corporation. "You're really leaving?" Carla asked. She wasn't surprised, exactly. Just curious. "I'm going to try," I said. I ran the numbers. "It's time." She shook her head, half in admiration. "You funded half this department," she said. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're really lucky to land on your feet. They're lucky you stayed this long." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me in years. With the payout they offered long-term employees and the savings I'd scraped together, I put a down payment on a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much to look at from the street peeling paint, a sagging porch. The backyard was what sold me. There was space. Space for a garden, for Lena to run, for the juniper tree I'd promised myself. On closing day, I stood in the middle of the overgrown grass with the keys in my hand, Lena on my hip, and felt something uncoil. I did this, I whispered into her hair. We did this. The house was in my name only. Ethan found out from Facebook. Wow, big house. He messaged. Under a picture my friend had tagged me in. Lena grinning on the porch steps. Guess you're doing pretty well without me. For a moment, the old instinct flared to explain, to make myself smaller so he wouldn't feel threatened. To say it's modest, really, or I had help. Instead, I closed the app. That night, I added a new folder, house. Inside it, I saved the deed, the inspection report, the amortization schedule I'd built myself. I printed copies for a fireproof box. By the time Lena turned 8, Juniper Ledger was no longer a side hustle. It was a firm. I had 2 part-time contractors and a client waiting list. I'd gotten into the habit of thinking in timelines, quarters, projection periods, strategic plans. I'd also quietly hired a lawyer. Her name was Priya, and she specialized in family law with the kind of resigned ferocity that comes from seeing too many women squeezed between sentiment and survival. I don't want to start a war, I told her in our first meeting. I just want something formal. For Lena. She nodded. We'll aim for a consent order, she said. Child support, custody terms, visitation schedule. It's not about punishing him. It's about putting on paper what's already true. What was already true was that I was the primary parent in every way that mattered. I knew the names of Lena's teachers, the songs that calmed her nightmares, the exact brand of peanut butter that wouldn't trigger her allergy. Ethan knew her favorite color when she was 3 because I told him over FaceTime, and he still got it wrong on a birthday card. When Priya sent over the draft agreement, I read every line twice, red pen in hand like I was grading a test. Shared legal custody, with primary physical custody to me. Visitation schedule, alternate weekends and Wednesday dinners, conditional on 30 days notice of travel. Child support, calculated according to his reported income, with a clause requiring updated financials annually. Failure to pay for more than 90 days would trigger wage garnishment. He's self-employed, I said. What if he just doesn't report accurately? Priya smiled without humor. That's what forensic accountants are for, she said. And judges who have seen every trick in the book. But for now, we get him to sign. Then we pay attention. Ethan balked at first, of course. You're trying to trap me, he wrote, when I forwarded him the draft. This is insane. We could have worked this out like adults. We had been trying to work it out like adults for 6 years, while he treated child support like a tip jar. I want stability for our daughter, I replied. The words measured. Please send any proposed edits to my attorney. He didn't like that phrase, my attorney, but he liked the prospect of a formal hearing even less. He signed. I added the agreement to the house folder and the child support folder, because if Ethan taught me anything, it was that every important document should be backed up twice. For a while, it almost looked like the script might change. He showed up for the first few scheduled weekends. He took Lena to the park, to the movies, to a trampoline place that made me sign a waiver so thick it felt like I was consenting to sell her organs. He posted pictures on social media with captions like, "Weekend with my princess," which made his friends comment about what a devoted dad he was. He made the payments on time for 6 months. Maybe he's growing up, my sister said over the phone. People can change. People can, I agreed silently. Patterns rarely do. On month 7, the payment was late. On month 8, he cancelled his weekend with a vague text about a contract falling through. He rescheduled, then cancelled the rescheduled date. He sent half a payment with an apology and a promise to catch up next month. Next month, he sent nothing. I forwarded the account statements to Priya. She filed a motion without fanfare. "You're really doing this?" Ethan texted when he got the notice. "You're going to drag me into court over a couple of late payments?" I looked out the window at Lena, chasing fireflies in the backyard, her laughter floating up through the screen. "It's not about you," I typed back. "It's about her." He didn't reply. Garnishment started 3 months later. From then on, I didn't have to ask. His contributions arrived with the same reliability as my invoices being paid. Not because he suddenly cared more, but because the system roped his paycheck before he could decide how he felt about it. When Lena asked why her dad seemed upset on the phone, why his texts were shorter, I told her the truth in language a child could hold. "Grown-ups are responsible for their choices," I said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "Sometimes, when people have to face the consequences, they get mad at the person who enforced the rule instead of themselves. That's not your fault. And it's not mine." She nodded like she understood more than I wished she did. The quiet revenge of it dawned on me slowly, that simply insisting on reality, on documentation, on math, could be its own kind of justice. I didn't slash tires or key cars or craft elaborate scenes. I kept records, I built a life. And while I wasn't watching, that life became something solid enough to stand on. The year Lena turned 9, Juniper Ledger signed its biggest client, yet a regional chain of clinics that had outgrown their in-house bookkeeper. The contract meeting was in a sleek office downtown, all glass and chrome. I walked in wearing a navy dress ID bought on clearance 3 years earlier, and had tailored to fit the woman I'd become. "You come highly recommended," the CEO said, shaking my hand. "Your projections are conservative but accurate. Our last consultant promised us the moon and didn't deliver." "I don't sell the moon," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my tone. "I help you see where you're standing." He laughed, delighted. "That's exactly what we need." When I got home that afternoon, contract signed, Lena was in the backyard drawing hopscotch squares with sidewalk chalk. "How did it go?" she called, hopping from one square to another. I held up the folder. "We got it," I said. She whooped and ran to hug me, leaving chalk dust on my dress. That night, after she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of the good wine I saved for client wins and opened a new spreadsheet. Projected revenue for the next 12 months. Updated emergency fund. College savings for Lena. Personal salary. I adjusted the numbers, watching them settle into something that looked, for the first time in my adult life, like ease. My phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered, still half focused on the spreadsheet. "Is this Amara Hayes?" A man's voice asked. "Yes. This is Daniel Mercer. I'm an attorney representing Ethan Patel." My spine went cold. Priya's expression softened. "We're not in the business of destruction," she said. "We're in the business of balance. Right now, he's asking the court to let him be less responsible while keeping more control. The law doesn't love that. You, on the other hand, have something very boring and powerful on your side." "What's that?" "Receipts," she said. In the weeks that followed, while Ethan's lawyer sent increasingly urgent emails, I didn't react publicly. I took Lena to school, to piano, to soccer. I filed extensions for clients and helped a bakery decide whether they could afford to hire another part-time baker. Behind the scenes, I gathered bank statements, investment accounts, the original shareholder agreements I'd scanned and saved without thinking much of it. Every text, every email where Ethan had acknowledged my contributions, my sacrifices. When mediation finally came, it was over Zoom, because the world liked to add layers of distance to already uncomfortable conversations. Ethan appeared on my screen in a t-shirt and backwards cap, looking thinner than I remembered, but still somehow performing casual ease. "Hey," he said, as if this were a catch-up call, not a legal proceeding. "You look good. Let's get started," Priya said smoothly. Mercer launched into his pitch about Ethan's decreased income, the challenges of the current economy, the emotional importance of a father's presence. I listened, sipping water, watching Lena's drawing tacked to the wall above my monitor, two stick figures holding hands under a tree. When they finished, Priya walked through our response. "We were open to revisiting visitation," she said, "provided he demonstrated consistency for 6 months. We were open to adjusting support if the numbers truly showed a change in capacity. But we would be requesting a full audit of his finances, including a valuation of the company, in which I, as documents showed, was a shareholder." The silence on the other end was heavy. "I thought you didn't care about that paperwork," Ethan blurted. "It was just for investors." "Paperwork is still reality," Priya said, "especially when you signed it." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You're really going to use that against me?" he asked, hurt bleeding through the bravado. "I'm going to use the truth," I said quietly. For Lena, mediation ended without an agreement. A court date was set. The night before the hearing, Lena asked if her dad was mad at me. "I don't know how he feels," I said honestly. "But I know how I feel." "How?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Clear," I said. "For the first time, maybe ever." She thought about that, then nodded and changed the subject to a book she was reading. Kids have a way of knowing what is theirs to carry, and what is not, if you let them. The hearing was set for a Monday. Ethan never made it to court. He didn't show up because, the night before, he broke into my backyard. It was late on a Sunday when it happened, one of those evenings where the air is thick and restless. Lena had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie. I carried her to bed, kissed her forehead, and went back to the living room to clean up the popcorn we'd spilled. My phone buzzed with a notification from the security app I de-installed when we moved into the house. Backyard camera. Motion detected. I frowned. It was windy, but not that windy. I opened the live feed. The image was grainy in the low light, but there he was, clumsy and desperate, one leg thrown over the fence, one hand gripping the top of the post. Ethan. My heart didn't slam the way it might have years before. It narrowed. I watched him drop down into the yard, stumble, straighten. He looked around, breathing hard, then started toward the back door. He bypassed the small gate I'd installed for the garbage cans, headed straight across the lawn. I'd reseated myself, crushing the fragile grass under his boots. He was muttering to himself. The camera picked up fragments. My house. My kid. She can't. He tried the back door. It was locked. Of course it was. He pounded on it with the side of his fist. "Amara," he shouted. "Open the door. We need to talk." Lena stirred in her room. A small rustle through the baby monitor I still used, more out of habit than necessity. I turned down the volume, took a breath, and did what I had trained myself to do in every crisis since the night he left. I made a list. 1. Ensure Lena is safe. 2. Document. 3. Call for help. I texted my neighbor, Mrs. Garza's daughters, who now lived 2 houses down. Emergency. Can Lena crash with you for a bit? I'll bring her over the front way. She replied instantly. Of course. Ethan banged on the door again. I know you're in there, he yelled. You can't hide behind lawyers and paperwork forever. I'm her father. I have rights. I hit record on my phone, pointed it at the security feed, and let it run. Then I called 911. There's a man in my backyard trying to force his way into my house, I said. My voice sounded calm, like I was ordering takeout. He's my ex-husband. There's a custody order in place, and he's not supposed to be here outside scheduled visitation without notice. The dispatcher took my address, told me officers were on their way, and advised me to stay inside until they arrived. I need to take my daughter to a neighbor's for safety, I said. I can go out the front. The back door is locked. Do that quickly and quietly, she said. And don't engage with him if you can avoid it. I hung up, grabbed Lena's small overnight bag from behind the couch packed months ago with pajamas, a toothbrush and a worn paperback, and went to her room. She blinked up at me, confused. Sleepover, I whispered. She frowned. Now? I said. Grown-up stuff, you're safe. That's all you need to know. She trusted me enough not to argue. We slipped out the front door, the opposite side of the house from where Ethan was still shouting. I hustled her down the sidewalk, my hand firm around hers, the night cool against my face. From the street, the house looked quiet, contained, a box of light on a dark block. Inside, in the yard, a man pounded on a door that no longer led where he thought it did. Mrs. Garza's daughter, Aina, opened her door before we even reached it. Go, she said, pulling Lena inside. I've got her. Lock your doors. Thank you, I said, my voice catching for the first time all night. I jogged back to my house, heart beating faster now, but not from fear, from a strange, clear sense of alignment. Ethan wanted a scene. He wanted the chaos he was used to, the screaming, the tears, the chance to paint himself as the wounded one. I wasn't going to give it to him. When I stepped back into my living room, he was still pounding on the back door. Amara, he shouted. Open up or I'll... He didn't finish the sentence, either because he ran out of breath or because the wail of approaching sirens cut him off. I watched through the front window as 2 patrol cars slid to a stop at the curb. Officers spilled out, hands near their belts but not yet drawn. They went around the side of the house. For a moment, there was more shouting. Ethan's voice, high and indignant. The calm, practiced tones of law enforcement. Then quiet. A minute later, there was a knock at my front door. Miss Hayes? A voice called. I opened it to find a female officer standing there, her partner visible in the yard with Ethan, who was now sitting on the grass, hands cuffed behind his back, cheeks flushed. Are you okay, Mum? She asked. Yes, I said. My daughter's at a neighbor's. We're both fine. She nodded. He says this is his house, she said carefully. Do you have documentation proving ownership? Of course, I said. I went to the fireproof box in the hall closet, hands steady, and pulled out the deed. I handed it to her along with a copy of the custody and support order. As she read, I watched Ethan over her shoulder. He stared back, eyes wild, a muscle jumping in his jaw. You set me up, he called, voice cracking. You always do this. Make me look like the bad guy. I almost laughed at the absurdity, as if I'd orchestrated his decision to climb my fence the night before a court hearing. I didn't invite you here, I said quietly. You chose this. The officer beside me cleared her throat. Based on the order and his presence here without consent, we're going to be arresting him for trespassing and violation of the custody agreement, she said. You'll need to give a statement. I understand, I said. As they led him toward the patrol car, Ethan twisted to look at me. This isn't over, he spat. You can't cut me out of her life. I met his gaze, not with anger, but with something far sharper. I'm not cutting you out, I said. You're walking yourself out. He flinched like I'd struck him. The next hours were a blur of paperwork and statements, of polite questions and the ache of adrenaline fading. Aina brought Lena back over once the officers left, her hand small and warm in mine. "Was that Dad?" Lena asked, her voice small. "Yes," I said. I'd promised myself, years ago, that I would not lie to her about who he was, even when it would have been easier. "Is he okay?" she whispered. "He made a choice that broke a rule," I said. "When grown-ups break important rules, there are consequences. That's not on you." She nodded slowly, chewing on her lip. "Are we okay?" she asked. I knelt so we were eye level. "We are more than okay," I said. "We are safe. We have a home. We have people who show up when we need them. And we have each other." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "I'm glad you didn't open the door," she said. "Me too," I said. After she went back to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, the same kind of table where, 9 years earlier, I'd stood with dishwater on my hands, reading a text that cleaved my life in two. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Daniel Mercer, terse and formal. "Given tonight's incident, my client will be unavailable for tomorrow's hearing. We anticipate rescheduling and will be in touch." Priya, who was copied, replied before I could. "We will be present as scheduled," she wrote. "The court can address both matters at once." I closed my eyes and exhaled. The next morning, in a courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, a judge listened to the facts. He looked at the timeline, the support history, the arrest report. He looked at me, my documentation, my folders, my calm, and then at the empty chair where Ethan was supposed to sit. In the end, he didn't reduce Ethan's child support. He tightened the terms instead. Visitation would be supervised until further review. Any unscheduled contact at my home would be considered a violation. And regarding the company shares, the judge accepted a proposed settlement. A transfer of any remaining liquidable assets into a trust for Lena, administered by me, in exchange for releasing Ethan from future claims on the business itself. Afterward, in the hallway, Mercer approached Priya and me. "He wants to talk," he said, nodding toward a bench down the corridor. Ethan sat there, shoulders slumped, eyes ringed with shadows. I considered the bench, the man, the 9 years between the text he'd sent and the fence he'd climbed. "No," I said. "He can talk to his lawyer. I'll talk to mine." Mercer nodded, unsurprised. On the drive home, Lena chatted in the back seat about a school project. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, painting everything gold. When we pulled into the driveway, she unbuckled and raced to the backyard. "Look," she called. "The tree." The juniper sapling we'd planted the year we moved in had grown, branches thickening, roots gripping deeper into our soil. I stood there, keys in my hand, and let the sight settle into me. 9 years ago, a man walked out of my life by text and expected me to crumble. Tonight, another version of him tried to break back in. Sure, he still had the power to shake the foundations. But the house stood. The tree stood. My daughter stood, laughing under the branches of a life I had built detail by detail, receipt by receipt, decision by quiet decision. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. In the kitchen that evening, I opened my laptop. I moved the folders Ethan pregnancy, Ethan child support, house into a new one, Lena, future. All the paper trails that had once felt like weights now looked like scaffolding. For the first time, I let myself imagine a future story where Ethan was not the central chapter but a footnote. A lesson Lena would someday understand, that sometimes the quietest revenge is simply refusing to collapse. My phone buzzed one more time that night. It was a notification from my business email. New inquiry. Potential retainer. Women's financial coaching. A woman had written a few lines about wanting to leave her marriage, but not knowing if she could afford to. I looked at the message, at the familiar fear between the words, and felt something in my chest expand. I started typing a reply. "We can start by looking at what you already have," I wrote. "You might be stronger than you think." Before I hit send, I paused. 9 years ago, I had begged a man not to make my life harder than it had to be. Tonight, I realized I was the one who could choose ease or struggle, clarity or chaos. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone, locked the doors that were mine to lock, and stood at the back window, watching my daughter's tree sway in the night breeze. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the first honest chapter. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.